Hello, good morning. Interesting. Apparently I have messed up my, there we go. Switching between scenes somehow changed something I didn't intend it to. Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Rachel Tapman, and my channel is for anyone who cares about language technology and other people. This is Coffee Chat. I have my coffee. And yes, I know the handle's broken. That's okay. Hello, Reg. And Dano, welcome. Today, we're gonna follow the usual order. So we're gonna start with research. Don't have a ton of research papers to talk about today, but some interesting stuff. And then just sort of practical stuff that's gonna be useful in day-to-day work. And then just a couple political things, not a whole bunch, some news stories about, court cases, legislation, that sort of thing. And then a lot of ethics discussion today. And this is where we're going to talk about something we've been chatting about on Twitter, which is providing mental health services via large language models. Spoiler alert, I don't recommend it. We'll talk a little bit more about why. And then finally, some just like fun miscellaneous things, a little bit of a palate cleanser. Luke, good to see you. Welcome. And I'm going to try and remember. So I did this for last week. I had a great comment that suggested it. I'm going to try and remember to go through and add chapter titles for all of them on the YouTube. I feel, yes, on YouTube. The YouTube video, so that you can go back and scrub through and see what all the different overarching subjects are. I'm not going to add chapter titles for every single one of the things we're going to talk about. That would be a very long task to do. So with that in mind, let's get started with our research papers. So this first one is actually from a couple years ago. It's from 2020. Hat tip to Jay Alomar over on Twitter. I think he's at Cohere right now. For bringing this up, and I think it's just a helpful, interesting paper, and it is Experience Ground Language by Bisk et al. And it was at EMNLP 2020, November of 2020, and the sort of the general gist of the paper is that it draws on work from cognition and cognitive science to zoom in, not out, to sort of rank the complexity of different ways of modeling the world, starting with sort of smaller corpus methods, moving on to the current zeitgeist, I guess, gestalt. Hey, Ravi, welcome. Of using large models trained on internet data, and then perception, so adding multimodal things in like robotics. Robotics would actually be embodiment being the next level, and then finally social, so including interaction with people in the world as sort of increasing levels of difficulty for NLP systems. So I think it's a generally useful paper. Mariella in particular tends to be a very Mariella Lapata in particular tends to be a very careful scholar. So I think it's just like a nice overview of sort of some thought from cognitive science, but certainly not all of it. So next up, we have this paper, which is on arXiv, and I believe it's forthcoming. Cracking nuts with the sledgehammer when modern graph neural networks do worse than classical greedy algorithms. So this is, I don't know, I guess at this point it's kind of a theme on this channel. One sec, let me just adjust some stuff really quick, because I did this all before stream and then it stopped working for some reason. There we go. So where was I going with this? Sort of a theme on the channel is, where should you not, hello Chad, welcome. Where you should not use deep learning methods, right? Where are they absolutely overkill? So I think this metaphor of cracking nuts with a sledgehammer is a good one. So not so, well, things like walnuts or pecans or, things like that tend to be like fairly small. Sledgehammers are very large and very powerful. You can crack a nut with a nutcracker, which is much smaller and less powerful than a sledgehammer, perfectly fine. So the sort of metaphor here is like, hey, you don't actually need to immediately go to, in this case, specifically graph neural networks. Classical greedy algorithms will work for a lot of the time. And like I said, I believe this is forthcoming work. So this is an actual preprint. I could be wrong on that. Anyway, so it's just a comparison of, for this specific problem. And it is specifically for graph neural networks, but put this in the file with the other papers that are arguing the same thing, which is that it's not always the best solution. So last week we talked about a lot of things about using tree models instead of neural networks with smaller data sets, smaller here being, until you have many tens of thousands of examples, probably don't. All right, and then next up, so this actually happened this week, but the video is still available on YouTube. Alexi says, I'm not supposed to use a sledgehammer to crack nuts. I mean, I wouldn't, but that said, there's a grand tradition. So I live in the southeast of America. Sometimes you'll hear people refer to it as just the South. And there's a grand sort of redneck tradition, and I'm using that term as a term of endearment and not a pejorative, of using trucks to crack English walnuts or other walnuts to get the nuts out in particular. So you'll make like a little trough and you'll put like the walnuts in it and you'll drive back and forth across it because they're very difficult to crack nuts. But yes, sledgehammer is a little bit much. So this is a really interesting workshop. So it's on specifically using machine learning methods in other sciences, right? So this is not reproducibility of machine learning research that's on machine learning. It's machine learning research on other scientific disciplines and issues that is causing in terms of reproducibility. And if you're not familiar with the reproducibility crisis, so this started in, I want to say, psychology. And basically there were some very well-known effects that it turned out you could only inconsistently elicit, basically using behavioral experimentation. And also it turned out some people were just lying about their data. It was a whole big thing. Alexi said, trucks are okay then. Well, I mean, you're much less likely to hit yourself with a flying nut if you're in a truck than if you're using a sledgehammer. Luke says, reminds me of a scene in The Simpsons where Chief Wiggum cracked his nuts with the butt of his gun, which I'm sure is a deeper metaphor for something. Perhaps. Yes, I'm not super familiar with The Simpsons, but yes. Yes, so this workshop is sort of looking at, okay, so we're using machine learning methods, and turns out the results that we're getting from those methods may not actually be super reproducible. So this is beside the question of, being able to train the same model twice, basically. But yeah, should be really interested if you're working in a scientific field and using machine learning. I think this is really valuable to think about. This leakage talk is particularly important. I think we saw a lot of examples of this with COVID research, machine learning research, and sort of the COVID domain, where other factors besides whether or not someone has COVID were being used to predict whether they had COVID, right? So unintentionally, because of spurious correlation in the data. Sorry, looking at Luke's example. Yep, that sounds very American. I guess I should say USian. It doesn't sound especially Canadian. All right. And this, I would say, is also on research because they're sort of talking about research topics, and I think it's a particular interest to researchers. And this is a new podcast called The Tongue Unbroken, and I'll just pop this in the chat as well. I think their website is not quite up yet, but it's hosted by an Indigenous scholar from these groups, and talking about, language revitalization. So that is, if a language has been used by fewer and fewer people, usually as the direct result of colonial violence. So in the United States, and also in Canada, I know that I think the Haida language speakers are mostly in Canada. Sami language speakers are also in Australia. No, wrong place. Entirely wrong place. Alaska. I'm not deeply familiar with any of these groups or languages. I'm just sort of familiar with them. But certainly in the US, there were residential schools for Indigenous children, where children were forcibly taken from their families and basically indoctrinated in European culture and punished for speaking their languages. And after many generations of this, it really harmed the ability of Indigenous people to have access to their ancestral language, and it happened quite recently. So even to the point where living Hawaiian people who grew up speaking Hawaiian, remember being punished for it in school. So yes, in that background, right, where the harm done to the people resulted in their language being spoken less. What does it mean for a bunch of white scholars to swan in and be like, we're saving your language for our own uses? And how can we maybe have another approach to things, right? So the idea of decolonization, not just not being colonial, but being actively anti-colonial, is very important to know about and to think about in these, if you're working with Indigenous languages at all, right? I am actually realizing that this one is slightly out of order, so we're going to do these slightly out of order as well. And related to that is the idea of moving things around. These tabs are very, very small. Related to that is this idea of Indigenous data sovereignty. So from Dr. Kat Milligan-McClellan on Twitter, who mentioned it. And I think this is a good starting resource from the Indigenous World GIA. I don't know what that stands for, but I'll post the link in the chat as well. So basically this is the idea that Docking says actively anti-colonial. I love that. Yeah. I think that is something I've mentioned on the channel a couple times. Is one of my core values is self-determination, and also as a result anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism. Rachel, you live on colonized land and come from the colonizers. Yes, I'm very aware. Anyway, so the idea is that Indigenous people should have control over their data, and where it's stored, who can access it, how it can be used, why it can be used, etc. And that ties into this discussion that Abeba Berhain had on Twitter. I put these completely out of order, which is why we're jumping around a little bit. About African language data sets. So these are, data sets that have been collected and curated by, open source projects in Africa, scholars working in their free time, students, people who are really doing a lot of work. So I've talked about Miscellaneous quite a bit on the channel. That's an example. And turns out large tech companies are using these data sets for, their own internal work. And I don't think it's necessarily inherently wrong that tech companies, for example, provide services in, a variety of languages. I think that is a good thing. I think that it is a problem when they are profiting off of the work of, scholars that they are not supporting, right? And similarly, it's been happening at Meta as well. So building language models that, off the work of these researchers whose work they are not supporting. And And often, a point that Dr. Verheyen is making is that then these models that have been trained using this data are then licensed for commercial use in such a way that it prevents the people who curated the data from actually using them. And the overall point is for those companies to profit, which is, so I think that this is, speaking of anti-colonialism and decolonialism, this is a very colonial approach to data, right? Like I am, let's say I'm a company, I'm in the US, an imperial power, I'm going to take this data that's been, curated and collected at great personal expense by indigenous scholars, I'm going to use it for my own ends and profit. And yeah, that stinks. That's a crappy thing to do. And they still do it. So we talked a little bit last week. I linked to a podcast about the idea of, particularly in the African cultural context, the way that data is seen as a communal good and not necessarily something that an individual can possess. And as we know, corporations are individuals, certainly in the US legal system, which is the relevant one here. And that sort of like ownership, personal view of data and art and intellectual property in general, the idea of intellectual property as opposed to sort of a communal approach where it's seen as a common good. So yeah, I think this is a clear example of going into the latter situation with the former viewpoint and doing crappy things as a result. So really good discussion by Abeba, and her recommendation is regulatory attention, right? So basically legal protections to afford these scholars the ability to continue to do that work and to be, frankly, financially supported by their work, for their work. And I think this is a really good point that we run into a lot in natural language processing. So I've mentioned a lot of times that natural language processing as a field has this strong ethos towards openness, right? Open source, open publishing, making things freely available. But also part of that ethos is then those things that have been made freely available are put to commercial use, right? So the history of natural language processing is very closely tied with, in the United States in particular, governmental and in particularly defense work, where things that are developed for defense applications are then applied for commercial applications, like the internet, just as an example, right? Designed and developed by American, researchers working in defense, and then sort of more generally open sourced. And that's not applicable everywhere culturally around the world and has the potential to really harm researchers. And in this particular effect, it has a chilling effect, right? People don't want to share their work if they know it's going to be, snapped up by large corporations for the benefit of that corporation to no benefit to the person who, or people who did the work in the first place. And right, it would be a very different thing if, let's say, Google were like Mozilla, right? It was a nonprofit. It was also investing heavily in this work. It was making its own work available. It wasn't seeking to profit off of this, but that's not the case, right? Facebook and Google are not nonprofits. They are for-profits. And yeah, anyway, colonialism. Moving on. And speaking of data, this is, I think, a particularly poignant story. So Pat Hall is discussing a case where data from 2003, which is not that long ago, and this particular paper towards a general model of interlinear text, proceedings of the ELD workshop, had a data set associated with it, and that data set is, fading from the web, right? So it's no longer available. The links are coming down. This link at the University of Australia, one of them, maybe Melbourne, is no longer available. and this is sort of a problem in general in academic publishing, particularly in sort of computer science related fields, where listen, old computer science professors wanted to build their own websites. They didn't want you to do it. And they, maintain them on their own, and then, not to be morbid, but when they die or, retire, I guess, they're no longer maintained, and eventually they get taken down. And if that's the only place the data lived, it's gone now, right? So archiving and, long-term preservation of data is not, in general, particularly for sort of old school CS NLP work, a particularly large consideration. We do have, what's their name? The big, they keep all the speech data sets. There is an organization, which I believe is a nonprofit, but does charge for access to help preserve those data sets long term, and I'm completely blanking on the name. But anyway, the only reason that the data survived was through the Internet Archive, and it has been reshared here. But this is one paper that one person happened to take an interest in and decided to mirror the data. A lot of data this never happened to, and it's just sort of disappeared forever. Speaking of reproducibility, so if there's a paper you care a lot about and the data has a license that allows redistribution, maybe mirror it somewhere. Robbie says, white people in America belong somehow to Britain, Ireland, neighboring countries, and Black people belong to Africa. My view on the US demographic. I mean, I think there's a pretty big difference between most white people in the US who, perhaps under duress, but still chose to come here, and African Americans who are here as the direct result of chattel slavery, who had no choice in the matter. Yeah, I mean, yep. And I mean, the fact is, we're here now, and it matters what we do, and it matters, what we support and how we can try to make restitution for the harms of the past. So one relevant thing is the land back movement. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but there's definitely, ongoing work by people who, colonized the US as part of, ongoing colonial violence to, try and make things better. But Yep, I know some of you are from Germany, and I'm sure you can appreciate the nuances of being in a culture that was massively shaped by a past genocide. So, yeah. My own family is Scottish mostly, some Irish as well, and a lot of my Scottish ancestors came over actually to Canada during the Highland clearances. My mother's a Ross. Yep. Anyway, imperialism. Moving on. Not that imperialism is not, and colonialism is not, a force that deeply shapes us, but we've already talked about it today, and then we've got other things to cover. Somebody actually brought this up last week, the issue with Transformers and sort of their attention span, if you will. So this is a AAAI paper, and the method that they are proposing here is a way to sort of handle those attention span limitations, to really be able to handle things that are more than 512 tokens is sort of the limit that they're trying to overcome here. And I'm going to be straight up with you. I do not know enough numerical analysis or number theory or whatever it's from. I don't get the math in this paper, but if you do, this may be of interest to you. So I'll pop this in the chat. Very math. And in particular, math that I have not touched. So yeah, but the sort of the outcome of this is that they are working on making it less expensive to train very long sequences. All right, and that is all the research stuff I had today. Today we've got a lot more practical stuff, and then a lot of ethics discussion, which is not going to be all bummers. I promise there will be some bummers, but not all of them. All right. So first off is jobs. And this is a newsletter that has job postings specifically for digital rights. And if you I guess follow along a lot with my channel, you know that digital rights are something that I think are particularly important, and this is a lot of jobs related to that. And some of them are going to be more legally focused, but I think there are some technical jobs in here as well. So may be a good place to look. Or if you're interested in maybe getting more into the legal side of things, could be a good resource as well. So any of you are interested in this, give it a shot. Also, if you're looking to hire, there is a thread here, and I'll post this in the chat as well, of different candidates specifically who are underrepresented in the US context, looking for work. So if you have an open role, check it out. And I'm pretty sure yes, so these are specifically going to be technical candidates. I don't know that they're going to specifically be for machine learning roles in particular, but yeah, if you're looking for folks, yeah, first one right here, Illiam William, data analyst. So yeah, check it out if you are looking for candidates. Another job resource. So the Vector. Hi Kong, welcome. So the Vector Institute, which I believe is based in Canada, has applications open for, has applications open, and I'll pop this in the chat as well, for a free machine learning class thing. I believe there are also maybe some sort of like prize money associated with the capstone. I'm not entirely sure of all the details. I put the link, but specifically for Black and Indigenous students. So if you are interested in checking it out, it might be a good resource. They also have, so they're not currently accepting, oh, maybe they are. I thought they weren't currently accepting applications for this, but they also have another course that's specifically for caregivers who are at home, like parents on paternity leave. So another good resource to check out. Again, it may be Canada only, but yeah, check it out if you're looking for some educational opportunities or you know someone who is. All right, and then some super solid advice from Maria Antoniak on topic modeling. So notoriously particularly tricky, and here she's talking about LDA here being latent Dirichlet allocation, not any of the other things that LDA means. I know that there are multiple ones, and just sort of how to get more useful models out of them. And I think this is super solid advice. So right off the bat, evaluate topics by hand. Oh, I guess firstly, yeah, you can use it. Evaluate the topics by hand, make sure they look good with your human eyes. Test different numbers of topics, right? So it's an unsupervised method. Maybe you have 5 topics, maybe you have 10 topics. If you don't have a very in-depth knowledge of the text that you're working with to begin with, it may take a little bit of tuning. Longer documents are better, sort of generally true. Tweets are gonna be hard. Tune your parameters, train using Gibbs sampling, so just sort of general recommendation about how to keep training time down. This is a great one. Keep most stop words and also don't stem. So the more data cleaning you do, the more you're going to sort of reduce the amount of information in the data. Yeah, there is another type of model, linear. Let me see if I can find it. I used to know it off the top of my head, but I am tired today. I have multiple things that I've completely forgotten about. Yeah, there's like a linear thing. I just don't have it in the top of the brain, but it can be pretty confusing because it also gets used in NLP. Yeah, and deduplication, general like data cleaning advice. So I would, I'd recommend it if you are working with topic modeling and kind of struggling. Lahore Development Authority. No, that's not the specific thing that I'm thinking about. It's all right. I'm gonna find it. Linear discriminant analysis. There we go. I got there eventually. Another thing that you may use in NLP. Yeah, thank you, Dino. You knew what I meant. All right. And then, so this is from, I think, Nima is, they are a developer advocate at Hugging Face. And this is sort of discussion of the different types of sentence transformers on the Hugging Face hub. I almost said GitHub face. None of those things were right. One sec. Let me finish my coffee. I do love coffee. I am trying to drink a little bit more. Nope, a little bit less. And replace more of it with like tea that's grown closer to where I am, because we don't grow coffee in the US, but I do like it. Maybe one day this will be no coffee chat, but we're getting there. And so it's just sort of a general discussion of different types of, sentence transformers, and the, different plays that you would use them. So I think it's just a good, helpful reference if you are looking for sentence transformers. And I guess I'll pop that link in the thread as well. And if you follow me, or if you're a monthly coffee supporter, where is it? It's over there. If you're a monthly coffee supporter, the links are up at the top. You should get, the links are out. You can find them on the coffee page where they are. As you can tell, I'm doing great. I'm fine, I'm just sleepy. So this was from our StudioConf, which I think was last week, by Jacqueline Nolis. And I think this is a great example of, why it's important to be super familiar with your data and understand underlying processes. So in this case, it's someone's resting heart rate. And as you can see, there's basically a step function here in the January 2021, where there's a permanent increase in heart rate. And in a general sense, in a general way, this would be bad, right? If you have a step function in your heart rate, like at over a couple years, and it changes dramatically, something has happened. You're probably going to want to see a doctor. However, this boundary here is in fact a software update of the sensor that was being used to collect the heart rate data, so in this case an Apple Watch. So I think this is a great example of the importance of knowing where your data is coming from, what's likely to affect it, etc. Right? So this is an outside factor. This is not a medical emergency. This is a software issue, and also maybe a hardware issue, a soft and/or hardware issue. Yeah. I think it's just helpful to have concrete examples of things like this, because people will bring it up in class, particularly if you're a learner, but you may not run into it for a while professionally. And then this was a super helpful thread. So if you are familiar with explainable AI, it's the sort of research topic of, I have a deep learning model, it's given me an output, why did I get this output for this input? Particularly if you are working in, I know some of you work in governmental situations where you need to be able to explain predictions. And we're not really there yet with deep learning, but one of the common approaches is to have like a heat map, basically, that says this is where a lot of attention was paid and this is where not a lot of attention was paid, and the things that had greater attention are more important to the output in this particular instance. Wow, excuse me. And there's some evidence, I don't have the paper link to hand, but that salience mapping may actually not be that explanatory. It kind of looks good, it's kind of intuitive, but it's not necessarily explaining necessarily in all situations. So this was a thread of people recommending different types of approaches that are not that. So yeah. And I'll pop this in the chat. And I think it's just a helpful discussion. Different people in the thread have more or less experience and different proposals for approaches. Ugh. All right. Next up, I know many of you have had questions for me in the past about linguistics and language data, and if you are interested in asking linguists things, good news, for those of you on Twitter, there is a way to do that. So there is a Twitter at Ask Linguists. If you have questions about language things and would like a linguist to answer, at them, and that's the whole thing. So give it a shot if you have things you want to know. Robbie says ethical AI is a boring subject. Oh, you mean explainable AI? This one? No, not at all. No, it's interesting. I'm just tired. Have I been doing too much? No, don't. Maybe. We'll talk about it in a little bit. I did write a blog post this week I was not planning on writing. And I've mentioned this before, I'm dyslexic, so writing is particularly taxing for me. And I already have a writing project, which is plenty. But yes, I had a very tiring brain day yesterday. Also on the sort of general topic of data cleaning, and this in particular I think is a good example of something that's discussed in the stochastic parrots paper, if you're familiar with that one, where one of the issues with language models is that you can't assume that text is a good representation of what's happening in the world, and this is a great example of this, right? So this orange line here is the number of shootings, and the sort of hashed line here is the number of times shootings were mentioned in the media, right? So you can see that even though the sort of overall number of shootings has not changed dramatically, the amount that it's been discussed has increased a lot. So if you were building a sort of model of the world based on text describing the world, like news stories, you would end up with a skewed model. Should link for topic modeling for the people. I'll pop it in there, yeah. Oop. I thought I had, but it looks like I didn't. Apologies. There you go, Shed. Sorry about that. Hello, Brett. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Yes, so a great example of why even news text is, I'll get out of the way, even news text is not always a great representation of what's actually happening, and over-reliance on it will end up with a skewed vision. And just sort of more generally, this is being used. There is a perception of a big increase in crime in the United States fueled by these types of news stories, even though overall at sort of a large scale, we are seeing a continuation of the general trend of crime reducing over time. So yeah, and then that perception is then being used politically to argue for, more policing, even though there is lots of popular support for less policing and using those resources elsewhere. Yep. Anyway, in good news, yeah, no worries, Shed. In good news, we have this blog post. So Ethica is a company that does open source privacy stuff, and they ran a survey of 337 software engineers to try and get a bead on how software engineers feel about privacy engineering. And I mean, grain of salt, this is what they're trying to sell. But 76% of respondents believe that data privacy is somewhat or extremely important in their role. And 62% answered that being able to do data privacy tasks are necessary to be successful at their job. So I find that pretty heartening. It looks like a strong majority of software engineers in this sample are, taking data privacy very seriously and using measures to protect it day to day. Good to hear. Data privacy is great. And then this is a little bit of a funny tweet, but also a true tweet, right? And it's by Christopher Molnar, who is the author of Interpretable Machine Learning. Speaking of explainability. Who made this point that no amount of parameter tuning, benchmarking, automation, model comparison, automated feature engineering, etc., can automatically figure out what is in the data column location 123 old contains and whether it should be a feature or not. And the point here is that some things cannot be derived mathematically, and you have to go ask somebody. Similarly, if we look back at the example of the example of the software update permanently changing somebody's heart rate. Well, it didn't actually do that, right? There's no causal effect here. There is just a change in the data. And if you know the data well, you know that this is a case, right? Or this one, right? If you know that there's a disconnect between, from your social knowledge, that there's a disconnect between the actual number of shootings and the number of shootings discussed in the media, right, then you know that is a result of the quality of the data and not the world. And if you don't know that, right, if you don't have that external information, you can't figure it out. How do you figure out that information? Well, you ask people, and you do your research, and you look for other sources. And particularly in a corporate context, you send a lot of emails and bother people and try to get them to give you more information about when a feature was added and what's going on there. And I've interacted with a lot of databases, both sort of professionally and as an amateur. And I would say the number of databases that have both correct and up-to-date full documentation of what's in the database are vanishingly slim. So yes, I've spent many emails being like, what is this? Or like Slack messages or whatever. Yep. Brett says, New Zealand has a ram raid thefts all over the news. Ram raid. I don't know what a ram raid is. I'm gonna assume that's a New Zealand term for sheep rustling, and someone's stealing some sheep. It's hyped up as news because of the CCTV footage of doors breaking in. It's great TV, but makes people think that crime seem like it's happening more. Yeah. Yep. Also a problem in the US, very much. Oh, did I do the same link twice? Sure did. All right. Also of relevance for I think most of us, there's a new Python major. So 3.10.6 is out as of August 2nd. And there are some, new things. In particular, I'm pretty happy about being able to write unions using the pipe character, so I think that's going to be helpful. And just sort of like a number of quality of life changes, bug fixes, a lot of them. So if you are able to, if you're able to upgrade, consider doing it. Also, if you're using dist-utils, know about it and handle that out. Also, this may be relevant to a lot of people working with different encoders. Thank you, Brett. That is a helpful explanation of what that is. Stealing a car and then using it to ram into buildings. Oh, I have switched to my second cup of caffeinated tea, which is why it's different. So check that out. And then this is actually published in Nature, and 6 tips for better spreadsheets. And if you are familiar with the history of Nature and spreadsheets, there are a number of issues that have happened in sort of scientific research around spreadsheet usage. In particular, Microsoft tends to autocorrect gene names to dates, and that has caused a lot of unfortunate errors in genomics research. But just some general piece of advice that I think for most of you are probably going to be, can I make this, get this out of the way? There we go. I think for most of you are going to be review, but this could be really helpful to pass on to other colleagues. Yeah. Brett says, "Lol, going to New Zealand for sheep because they outnumber the humans." Yep. Alexi says, "Making my research about sheep wrestling." Excuse me. Sorry, not sheep wrestling. Sheep rustling. Actually, I don't know how to spell wrestling. One sec. Is it with a T? I think it's with a T. Yeah, sheep rustling. Specifically, like stealing livestock is what rustling is. It may be an American term. Which framework would I use in Python for making a dashboard? Well, Shiny works with Python now, so Shiny. Yeah, so first up, keep your data raw. Keep a copy of the raw data, perhaps, if you are working in that paradigm. Make the data machine readable, please, 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 please. Yeah, so don't encode data with color or formatting. Create another column that can be sorted or filtered. Be consistent, document your work, cross-check your data, and think ahead. So just solid pieces of information and advice for people working with spreadsheets might be good to pass along to other people. Boop. Boop. There you go. All right. And then this one. So this is the last one, sort of the practical thing. Remember last Tuesday, 2 days ago is how long it's been. Way less time than it feels like. When I was like, if there's no data poisoning on GitHub, I'll send you a hat. And I think my hats are safe. So this was making the rounds. You might have seen it. It got shared quite a bit. This person's like, I think this is a malware attack. And I think it's probably not a malware attack based on other discussions that I've seen. So, for example, a lot of the, the specific strings here were showing up in copies, not forks, but copies of other repositories. And if I had to guess, I would say that this is more likely to be a data poisoning attack than a malware attack, targeting things like Colab. Would be my guess. I'm not a security person, but that's what it feels like to me. So. Alexi says, the stream was more educational than I expected. Glad to help. About sheep rustling, I'm assuming is what that is referring to. So, be warned, avoid scraping. That's just sort of my general advice. Like, avoid scraping if you can. Get a data set that's actually relevant to your specific use case. And political stuff. So first up, we have this. So one of the things that was an option for the stream on Tuesday that I didn't end up going with is, harmful uses of text. Because I think it's, if you are working in, a field like NLP, you should know what some of the risks of harm are if people misuse the technology that you're working on. And one of the harmful uses of text is impersonation. And in this case, it seems to be that the Chinese government is sending emails impersonating human rights activists who are protesting the Uyghur genocide. And in this case, it worked, right? So as a result of this fake email, who was not sent by the person who it seemed to be sent by, this person was detained for 23 hours. So Yes, very clear harmful use of text. We also talked a couple weeks ago about deepfakes being used to impersonate world leaders in calls with other world leaders. So in this case, I think it was the mayor of Kyiv was being impersonated in calls with other mayors, and eventually, like the mayor of Berlin figured it out. But yes, so impersonation is a harmful use of text and machine learning in general. Yeah. Bobby says, this is a news channel. Well, I mean, this particular stream is a little bit more news focused. What's the stream called? Like Week in Review or something? Yeah. Robin says, Experience Grounds Language is an interesting paper. Just got introduced to it. Yeah, you're very welcome. Again, I think it's a good overview. It's a good jumping off point if you're interested in getting into the cognitive literature. But yeah, a helpful way to think about things, I think. And I've mentioned embodiment sort of like in passing a couple times, so I think it's nice to have a citation to point people at. And I'm very happy that you are learning things, Voltbit, even if maybe some of them are bummers. I always end with something a little bit more uplifting because we talk about some heavy stuff in this stream, unfortunately. Also, this authoritarian tech newsletter is, speaking of bummers, extremely informative. I think good for technologists to know about. I would recommend it, but it's not going to make you happier. All right, and speaking of learning more, let me post the link to this as well. Speaking to more, if you're interested in learning more about privacy and data protection, this is a thread that's been put together by a PhD candidate working on those topics, a book she'd recommend. So Privacy's Blueprint, Re-engineering Humanity, No Place to Hide. And I haven't actually read a lot of these books, and I'm really interested in sort of like digging into them a little bit more. And just I'm just sort of scrolling here so you can see it. So just a sort of a little bit of background. So when I first started getting interested in ethics and machine learning, and I was really interested in tools working well for everybody, a lot of the ethics talks I went to kept bringing up privacy. And at like the time, I was like, this is kind of boring. I don't really care that much. I don't think privacy is actually that important. And I was wrong. In fact, privacy is extremely important. And I think one of the main reasons why it's very important that as language technologists we think about privacy is because the things that we work on can directly enable the erosion of privacy in a large-scale way that's spread very widely. So, the promise of machine learning is that we can do more things faster with less work. And if those things are harmful, then that compounds the harm that happens. And I think the erosion of privacy is one of those things that's particularly dangerous, right? And we'll talk about a couple more examples a little bit later of particular examples of of the danger. But I think in this sort of discussion, something that's important to think about is that corporations, right? The majority of the data that is passed around the internet goes through the hands of corporations, right? And the people who run corporations do not have a duty to protect us as users. They have a duty to maximize profit. So it's what's called a fiduciary responsibility, basically. And the idea is that, if you're on the board of directors, you are legally bound to increase profits by whatever means are necessary. And as a result, privacy is not part of that consideration unless, right, doing something would violate privacy laws in a way that has large financial penalties. So that's part of the reason why, GDPR has large financial penalties, is to help protect public privacy. And if you are, I think one of the sort of common things that people bring up is if you don't have anything to hide, it shouldn't matter. It's okay that nothing's private. But even if you don't have something to hide, you probably don't want to share every part of your life with every person in your life, right? So like I love my sibling, I don't tell him everything, right? And I wouldn't want to tell him everything, right? And like there's many people in my life who are very close friends that I don't tell everything that's happening in my life, and that should be my choice, what I share and what I don't share in what forums. And removing privacy at an industrial scale takes that ability away from people, right? It reduces people's self-determination. And, we live in an age of growing authoritarianism, of ongoing genocides, right? And making it easier for state actors and, even non-state actors that are out to harm people to find harmful information about people is an issue. That's a problem, right? Like doxing didn't exist, when I was in elementary school, and now it does, and it's a real harm to people. So anyway, this is all to say, like, I didn't used to think privacy was that relevant to me or was that important, but the older I get and the more I live in the world and the more things happen, the more I'm like, actually, it's very important and we should be protecting it as much as we possibly can. Yeah. Robbie says, companies share their balance sheets to the audience. Oh, you mean like financial disclosures? I mean, yeah, but, But that doesn't stop them from doing the crappy thing, right? So I'm not going to talk about it on stream, but when Apple made a change to make advertising on Facebook opt-in instead of opt-out, Facebook revenue fell by like 10% or something. Something wild, right? Like the decision that was better for users hurt revenue substantially of this large tech company. So anyway, privacy is important. Speaking of other related things, that was a very weird way to drink from this mug. I wouldn't recommend it. There is a bill in South Carolina. So South Carolina I'm in Virginia. It's 2 states south of me. It's quite close geographically. That would make it a felony to host or maintain websites that could help women access abortions. So if you may be familiar that previously in the United States, previously to like a couple months ago, there was a right to privacy as a result of this court case called Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade being overturned didn't completely remove all privacy rights, but it has absolutely weakened them dramatically. And one of the things that right to privacy covered was for women or other people who can get pregnant to be able to have abortions. No longer the case due to a Supreme Court case. And as a result, sorry, my dog's being loud. As a result, there had been a wave of state level legislation proposed, some of which has already been enacted, to make it illegal to get an abortion or to help other people get an abortion. And in this case, they would be targeting ISPs and other, search engines, anything like that. And the big worry here is that it's very difficult to say, I am going to only make this the case for somebody in South Carolina and not for somebody in North Carolina, for example. So it may very well be the case that if this gets passed before it's repealed, tech companies may voluntarily self-censor. Yep. Anyway, bad. Yeah. Vbolt says, do you still do live coding streams? I used to watch you a long time ago when I was at Kaggle. Oh, yeah. Occasionally, yeah. Yeah, every so often. I'm planning on doing one in the next little bit. I don't want to give you any specific dates, but right now my stream schedule is on Tuesday, we do a deep dive into some sort of like language technology topic, and then on Thursday, we do this, and we talk about news and what's going on and etc. Yeah. Although I think I've had the sort of general career trajectory of most, engineers and data scientists, where when you get more senior, you just do less coding and more thinking about things like privacy. what is attached to my dog that's making the noise? Great question. So he has a collar, and on the collar he has a tag that says that he's microchipped. He has his rabies vaccination, and he has his, there's also a third tag. So it's just basically information about him in case he gets lost. Yeah. So speaking of privacy, another thing that we've been talking about quite a bit recently on the channel is data brokers. And data brokers are companies that buy information about people and sell it. And in the United States, law enforcement agencies have been using this to ignore the Fourth Amendment, right? Because you don't need a warrant to get information from somebody if you can just buy it. And it's available on the open market, and there's no laws around it. So it continues to be an issue. In this case, they are collecting information on pregnant people, which, relating it back to abortion now being illegal, could be used to against people in court. And I believe they did talk about in this article about the fact that, having a digital trace saying like, hey, this person was pregnant is very much admissible evidence, and it's been used in the past to enforce abortion laws. In 2015, Indiana prosecutors used a woman's online search history as evidence to prove she illegally induced her own abortion, and she was convicted of feticide. So a great example where an erosion of privacy led to direct harms on a person. Yep, and data brokers are showing, I would say, what's the saying? It's difficult to make a person understand something when their job depends on them not understanding it. This particular example, the owner of Complete Medical Lists dismissed the idea that this could be dangerous. As evinced earlier in the article, it's directly dangerous. I simply cannot imagine a scenario where a law enforcement agency could obtain a subpoena for essentially every self-reported new pregnancy in the US. Very much something that they could do, and also they could just buy it. He's selling it. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you like it, Volpit. Brett says, "Wow, yep." So I've talked before about surveillance companies and how I don't like them, and if you were considering, working for one, maybe don't, maybe don't if you have the option. Speaking of privacy violations, we talked a little bit ago about, this was reported on, that some hospitals, when you went to the hospital to sign in, were using tablets, and on those tablets, Facebook had a tracking pixel and was sending information back to Facebook. And that is a violation of HIPAA. HIPAA is one of the few privacy protections we have in the United States. And it's not actually designed as a privacy protection. Basically, it's rules about what health providers, specifically health providers, we'll come back to that, can do with your health data. And selling it to Facebook is, as it turns out, not one of those things. So they are being sued, and I hope they get their lunch eaten because that was an unbelievably crappy thing to do. But I mean, it's meta. Anyway. Also a paper, and this one may also be a preprint. Let me see, or it may be to appear, right? So this is actually a preprint, and I'll pop the link to this on the chat. And this is more on sort of individuals and what they're doing. Doop doop doop, doop doop doop. So this may be something that you're familiar with. I don't think we've talked about it a whole bunch on this channel, but in the United States right now, for probably pretty much the first time in my life, we are seeing a lot of renewed labor organization. So things like unionizing, or generally collective bargaining. So Starbucks is in the middle of a huge unionization effort. Amazon warehouse in New York was unionized. Alphabet, the company that owns Google, has a union. Anyway, so there's a really large ongoing labor movement in the United States. And this paper talks about some of the privacy practices taken by people who are doing labor organizing, right? So, and sort of like the big thing is that people do different things to protect themselves from management and to protect themselves from their coworkers who may be, may not have their best interests at heart. Let me put it that way. Brett says heart unions. Hell yeah. When I worked at Google, it was before the Amazon, before the Alphabet Workers Union formed. But yeah, I'm a big fan of them. I think they're doing great work. And then in graduate school, I was in a union, and it was the reason I had health insurance in the summer, which is good. So yeah, I am also a big fan of unions, and I think it helps. It's one way to help address the power asymmetry between corporations and humans, the ones who gotta live in the world, Yeah. Robbie says, what's your opinion on the meta world of Facebook? I don't think it's a great use of resources. Also, they're getting weirdly a lot of credit for doing a worse job at being Second Life. So yeah, that's sort of my stance on that. Also, they've lost a lot of money, like a lot of money. I think there was like something like, I don't know. I saw the figures recently. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but yep. Yeah. And did I pop this link in the chat? I sure did. So, interesting read, and sort of more on the political organizing side of things than legislation. Ethics time. I'm gonna warn you right now, there's some bummers in here, but also some not bummers. I'm trying to, my goal is never to make you feel hopeless. My goal is always to help you be informed and feel empowered to do things, like maybe union organizing. So I think this is a really good example of the weight that software engineers carry, and that sometimes perhaps we don't, software engineering as a field carries, and that sometimes is not treated with the same weight that it is in sister fields like mechanical engineering or civic engineering. Yeah, Brett says lol at Second Life. React is cool, and some of their other open source code is good. Other parts of Facebook are evil. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Facebook. Let's put it that way. They are not, as far on the top of my list of companies that if I could just like snap my fingers and make disappear, I would. Clearview, way up on there. Palantir also on that list. Yeah, I definitely have some like companies that I think are more evil and are doing not necessarily more harm, but a greater proportion of what they do is directly harmful. But yeah, Facebook is not making the world a better place. Anyway, so this is a software, I think it's like a nonprofit, but it's based here in Richmond, Virginia, where I live. And the company has like severe issues with their software, right? And the issues are grave enough that multiple people's deaths have been directly linked to software issues at this company, and also wasting of organs, right? So if you're not familiar with organ transplant, I'm going to assume most of you are. Basically, someone donates their organs to other people who can use them, and then when they are no longer using them, they are moved into, via surgery, the bodies of people who need them. I'm going to assume most of you know what organ transplanting is, but that like process is extremely time sensitive, and the software issues have killed people, right? So I think it's, again, unlike civic engineering or mechanical engineering, we don't have a legal duty of care as software engineers, but I think it's important for us to think about the fact that our work affects people, and sometimes in a mortal way. Yeah. Alexi says, I want to see the full list of Rachel's enemy. It's a mental list. It is mostly corporations, right? Yep. Listen, I'm trying to be accurate and also not like unneededly upsetting, to respond to Alexi's comment about no longer using them. Yeah. anyway, so the United Network for Organ Sharing, because of their software engineering problems, have caused, significant harm. And I think it's, we talked last week about that sort of the CVPR researchers being like, oh, it's not my job. It doesn't matter, right? My work doesn't actually have an effect on people. And obviously this isn't in the domain of machine learning, but it does matter and it does have an effect on people. And gosh darn it, I want people to care. So Luke says, I think there'd be some overlap in our enemies list. Yeah. Oh no. Oh no. Oh dear. What's been unplugged? I'm gonna keep talking in the off chance that you can still hear me. I think I've unplugged my monitor power. Everything has gone black. All right. Hopefully nothing looked different to you, but I kicked a cord and everything went dark. I think it was just my monitors. Oh, and we're still live and I didn't lose any frames. Okay, yes, I think that was just on my end. Yes, I was going to say, I think if you have watched this much of my stuff, then we probably have some shared values, I would guess. Also in the bummer side of things, so this was also from our studio conference, and this was just really disappointing for me to hear, is that less than 3% of data scientists are women of color. So you may notice that a lot of times I'll, share opportunities that are specifically for, Black and Indigenous people, other people of color. And yeah, this is why. It's, yeah, that's a very, very, very small number. And I am very disheartened to hear it. And I hope that it can go up in the future. Speaking of Facebook being evil, so this is a experiment that was done as part of investigative reporting around Facebook serving messages that promote genocide ahead of Kenya's election. So Kenya has a very contentious election that's going on, and in this test, basically these reporters and news agencies tried to buy ads. They didn't actually put them live on Facebook, but they tested to see if Facebook would stop them. But they basically bought ad space to serve ads that encouraged genocide, right? That encouraged violence, that had, horrible, hateful, racist things in them, and they got through. They spoke of, beheadings, rape, and bloodshed. They compared people to donkeys and goats. Some also included profanity and grammatical errors. The Swahili language ads easily made it through Facebook's detection system and were improved for publication. As for the English ads, some were rejected at first, and you're like, oh, okay, system's kind of working, but only because they contained profanities and mistakes in addition to hate speech. Once the profanities removed and grammar errors fixed, however, the ads, still calling for killings and containing obvious hate speech, went through without a hitch. Sorry, I'm taking a second to center myself, to check in with my emotions. This is absolutely unacceptable, top to bottom. Dang it, I'm trying not to swear. I want to use some profanities. Oh, what the hell? Oh, and I just want to say that I am very grateful for investigative reporters and people who are pushing back on companies that are doing horrible things. But, Facebook is directly profiting off of these ads in an already extremely tense political situation. Swahili, not a language with 14 speakers. Swahili is a major world language, and even the English ads, obvious hate speech. We're we're still served, right? And we talked, I think, last week about Facebook serving ads, falsely claiming that you could reverse medication-based abortion, and encouraging women to do things that in trials, the doctors running the trials had stopped doing because it was so dangerous and almost killed so many people. Jesus Christ. Anyway, Alexi says, oh fuck, yeah, absolutely. Cognition says, what a surprise. Yeah, it's not, but it's... the fact that no one's forcing Facebook to serve ads, right? Like, there is no fundamental human need for Facebook to serve ads. There is no fundamental need for social media to exist, right? Like, I'm very active on social media, but partially that's because I live in a society where social media is a part of that society. Most societies throughout history, that has not been the case. It's not a need. It doesn't have to happen. Any of the harms that are happening as the result of social media existing are not like being met to fulfill a human need, right? Like, carbon production is part of food production. We need to eat, right? And yeah, we can absolutely mitigate that. We can reduce it, but at the end of the line, it's serving a fundamental human need. Social media is not. If anything, it is monetizing a fundamental human need, which is social connection, while enabling horrible behavior and making the world worse. And obviously, not all social media all the time. But like, nobody's forcing Facebook to serve things. Facebook is choosing to serve things because it makes them a profit. Yeah. Lehigh says, tell us about your new job. Is it fun? How's the office? This is my job. So this is the office. Welcome. Yeah, so I'm giving it a shake as an independent content creator, and we'll see how it goes. Yeah. My office that I'm in right now is pretty nice. I feel very fortunate right now to be housed in a house I enjoy being in, which is, you know, no small privilege, and I appreciate it. So thanks for checking in. Cognition says, Facebook failed to do due diligence moderation. I'm gonna have a heart attack and die from the surprise. Very dryly and sarcastic. Yes. And they keep getting away with it. Anyway. However, just doing moderation isn't inherently good or fixing the problem. So this is, I mean, trigger warning for awful, hateful content, but, you know, content moderators working for TikTok in Africa are, you know, doing horrible work that's causing them enormous psychological harm for very little money, and without receiving a lot of support. Again, directly causing a harm. TikTok is not a fundamental human need. Short form video is not something we need to do. It's something we are choosing to build, choosing to serve. Companies are choosing to invest in because they think it will make them money, and it's hurting people directly. Also, just as a side note, I wouldn't use TikTok. Speaking of privacy, just from a privacy standpoint, I wouldn't use TikTok. That's my recommendation as a practitioner. That said, right, so I've been, you know, kind of down on social media. I've been like giving you lots of examples of like bad behavior, but I think it's helpful to talk about what does good behavior look like, right? How can this be done? Because obviously people find it valuable. Obviously people do use social media. How can it be done in a way that isn't harmful? And I think a really good example of a social media site that I think does a great job with moderation, does a great job really focusing on the user's needs and making the world better and not hurting people is Ravelry. So if you're not familiar with Ravelry, It is a member only, so you have to sign in to see the page at all. It is a social networking site specifically for knitters, crocheters, spinners, weavers, and dyers. And it is extremely heavily moderated. They have a clear code of conduct. They enforce it. They're, in places they have enforced it in such a way that it's made people angry, and they've gotten off the site and chosen to stop using it because of their, consistent commitment to inclusion. It is not an enormously profitable company. It's a very small company. There's a small handful of people who work on this website, but it is I think it's very well done. Technically, it's very beautiful. Obviously, I'm not logged in, so you can't see it, but big fan of Ravelry. It's very purpose specific, right? They do sell things, so you can buy things on Ravelry. You can buy patterns. I have some patterns up there from a while ago. You can buy, yarn. You can, interact with knitwear designers. So it's purpose built. It's specific. It's extremely heavy moderated, and they've never been focused on making a profit, right? Everything on Ravelry is user driven, and my experience as a user, that is true. We all help to make the site useful and fun. We are happy you are here. And then sort of like different things. Yes, they're not making a lot of money. No, this is not the world's most profitable website. Yes, they take moderation extremely seriously. They are purpose specific, right? They're not trying to be everything to everyone. And I think, in general, in terms of software engineering, that is a bad thing to try and do. And I think they do a good job. So this is, I think, a good example of what social media could be, right? It could be interest specific. It could be highly moderated. It could be very focused on user experience and making sure that that user experience is good and that the needs of users are genuinely centered rather than the needs of the corporation. But it's going to mean that lots of people make less money. And I think it's only going to happen if we see large scale, very rigorous, structured, legislation. So anyway, so I'm just gonna look through some of the comments now. Interesting to see if Facebook serves Russian propaganda ads. I don't know. And Robbie talking about Sri Lanka's president bringing law to the Tamil people, and the Tamil people didn't like it. And there was, it sounds like, a bombing at a church, and hate speech spread by Facebook contributed to destabilize the relationship between these two ethnic groups in Sri Lanka. Lehigh says, short form content is harmful. I feel numb after 15 minutes of TikTok because my brain is bombarded with loud music, flashes, and video. Stay away from any kind of 30-second content. Yeah. Luke says, have you had any first or secondhand experience with folksonomies in your line of work? Is this like a personal digital ethnography? Let's see. Oh, interesting. Yes, I am familiar with this mainly because some of my friends work in fandom studies, and this particular user-generated way of organizing information is pretty important in fandom studies, but I don't know by that term, so yeah. Yeah. Anyway, things are bad. They could be better, and we could make them better. All right. And this is just, I'll post the link here, but I thought that this was particularly parallel to a lot of the work that is done by people to prop up machine learning systems that make it look like things are happening automatically, but really there's, mechanical Turk. There's a human behind the system doing a big chunk of the labor. And this is specifically about virtual influencers. And the headline says China, but they talk about both China and Japan, and the, absolute overworking that happens for these the people who are voicing and animating through their movements these virtual influencers. So yeah, I think it's an interesting read and very relevant to machine learning because, of course, we use the data labor of data labelers quite a bit in kind of a similar way, right? And it's hidden behind this facade of a machine, similar to the TikTok content moderators. It's not automated, or it's not fully automated. There's a large chunk of human labor that happens into it. Yeah. Brett says, moderation is a nasty job that's often outsourced by Facebook and TikTok and is the most harmful and toxic of workplaces. Ravelry is lucky that the topics are well defined. Ravelry is not lucky. Ravelry made a decision in their design of the technology, right? There's nothing inevitable about the topics that Facebook covers or allows people to cover, right? Everything that is allowed is a direct result of engineering decisions made by Facebook. Facebook is not naturally occurring. It was built by people, and the decisions that they made while they built it led them to a place where they need to do large-scale content moderation, right? How do you get around this? Smaller communities. Right? Just don't have very large centralized spaces. Rachel, you're on YouTube. Yes, but I'm not talking to everyone on YouTube, right? I'm talking specifically to the language technologists and people who want to become language technologists, and ones who care about ethics at all. Right? Like, the community that I'm actually talking to is a small subset of the total community. Yeah, I don't give engineered products a pass because of what happens when users interact with them. User behavior is shapeable, it is moldable, and it is shaped and molded by what the community allows. Yeah. Ugh. Robbie says, talking with typing, it's really difficult. There should be an audio option in chat. Speaking of moderation and bad behavior, I think there's probably some reasons there aren't. Brett says smaller communities. Yeah, I think there's a point at which a community is so large that it cannot be meaningfully moderated, just like there's a point at which a data set is so large that you cannot meaningfully understand as an individual what is in that data set. And that opens you up for things like data poisoning. All right. So this is a talk, slides from a talk by Emily Bender, who's at the University of Washington, at a cognitive sciences conference. I think it covers a lot of topics really well, but it's on the general topic of resisting dehumanization. And the sort of general themes that she talked about, a lot of the things that we actually talked about today. So one is computational metaphor, and this idea of like, oh, computers are just like people. People are just like computers, right? So in particular, if you are like, a computer is like a person with a disability, then you are reducing what it is to be a person with a disability to the things that computers can do, if that makes sense. Digital physiognomy. So phrenology, if you're not familiar with it, phrenology is a pseudoscience based on eugenics that says that, I can look at a person and know about their characteristics based on their physical form. Yeah, and just various different things. Ghost work, which is one of the things that we talked about, like work that goes on by humans that is hidden and obscured. So lots of really good discussion and citations, and I would definitely recommend going through here and checking out some of the papers she quotes if you're interested. Speaking of ethical issues, so this paper actually came out quite a while ago. So this was, there was a system designed to, basically, if you design a system to not do something, you are also designing it to do that thing, right? And in this case, this was a system that was looking at, molecular structure and suggested a lot of possible chemical weapons. So it was designed for positive uses, but it got used for negative uses, right? So if you have a system that you're trying to, create molecules that can do good things in the human body, well, you have to know what the good things are and the bad things are, which means you can flip it and use it to find molecules that do the bad things, to really simplify that. Yeah, I think it'll be a really good resource cognition. Emily's talk. And particularly in the natural language processing space, I think that's something we really need to think about, right? So, text generation, I'm doing style transfer, great. Can that be used for impersonation? Yes, of course it can. And we've seen, today, nope, not that one, this one. We've seen today some of the harms of impersonation, particularly if it's automated and you can happen at scale and you can just sort of scattershot send a bunch of, vaguely threatening emails impersonating somebody. So yeah, I think just a really good thing to think about. This is something that I consider a lot, and we will talk about in just a second. Double-edged swords, Brett says. Yeah, exactly. Also, speaking of, I should probably have put these last two in the other order, but if you're in the United States, there is sort of a recent change where now cell phone carriers can sell your data to advertisers, including things like your exact physical location. So if you would like to opt out, here are guides for doing that on Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T. So maybe do that. Like we've talked about, privacy is important. So. Oh, yeah, Cognition also said double-edged sword. Yep, 100%. Yep. All right, finally this bit. Yes, I know. I don't know if you can hear my dog. He is romping around. So, we recently had a discussion on Twitter, and we mentioned it on Tuesday as well, about using language models to replace mental health professionals, right? Like, can you use GPT-3 or BERT to do therapy for someone? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Please don't do that. And I'm going to talk about like a lot of the reasons why. And I did write a blog post. I also put it on my Coffee, I'm pretty sure. So if you head over there, you should also get the link. But the reason that I made this post is that I saw someone saying that they had done it. I'm not going to link to them, and I'm not going to, send more information because I don't like to pile on, but don't, my God. And there are a number of reasons why it's a bad idea, and I'm going to, mention suicide in here. If you're in the US, 988 is the new suicide hotline as of last month, and I'm also going to, oh no, the link's broken. I got to fix that link right away. Oh dear. Okay, well, let me post the link in the chat really quickly. He does have a lot of information on his collar. Cognition says, imagine hearing chatbot therapist and not thinking it sounded like a horrible nightmare. Here's the thing. I am going to fix this in this link, in this page really quickly, because I didn't realize that link was broken. One sec, let me just do this real quick, because that is an important one to not be broken. So first of all, I'm going to say, if you are thinking about doing this, I think that it is clear that you are doing it because you care, right? And that you want to help. And I think that is good. I'm glad that you want to help. I think it's important. I see. All right. And yes, should be fixed. Is it fixed? Is it fixed? Can I update it? Hopefully it's fixed now. Sorry, that's very important that whenever you discuss topics like these, you make sure that you provide people resources to help right there in the topic. I know you want to help. I appreciate that. I applaud that. I don't think it's wrong to want to help. I think that's a great impulse. But I think that it is really important to understand that when you get into a healthcare setting, and when you get into working with very sensitive topics, a lot of times something can be, especially an automated something, can be worse than nothing, right? So I absolutely understand that access to therapy is not available to everyone. I absolutely understand that not all therapists are good, right? Like, I and people in my life have been dramatically failed by the mental health care system here in the United States. I'm not minimizing those experiences. I am saying that attempting to automate them is going to result in harm and that you shouldn't do it. And it's not just me saying this, right? So this paper is written by a bunch of clinicians, so people who work in this field as practicing, mental health care providers and physicians, that you should not replace the clinician-patient pair, right? And the potential for harm is astronomical. So I'm going to talk about some of the potentials. And again, I don't think you're a bad person if you didn't think about these. I'm not saying that, it was bad to have this idea. I'm saying that it would be harmful to act on it, right? First of all, language models they're just not gonna, they're not gonna do it off the bat, right? You can do prompt engineering, but to have good system performance, you're probably going to want to do some fine tuning, and you're probably gonna want to do some fine tuning on clinicians' notes because that's a specific domain that you're in. And that data is not widely available because that is private data, right? So in the US, it would be covered, depending on your relationship with the therapist. If it is a, clinician relationship, it would be covered by HIPAA. And that is extremely sensitive personal data, right? In this domain, right? So a research organization shared text from the crisis text line for the purposes of training machine learning models, and the blowback was, these are links. I know that the color actually is not super helpful, but the blowback on that was enormous. I don't actually know if legal action was taken or not, but regardless, the sort of the negative reaction in the field was extremely stringent. And I can tell you this, it hurt the careers of the people involved with that. And we also know, right, we talked about this in adversarial attacks, if you're training with real clinician notes, PII, so personal identifiable information, can be extracted via adversarial attacks, even if it occurs as few as 1 time in the training data. And I assume that also applies to the tuning data. I think it's a little bit of an open question, but I don't see why it wouldn't. Right? So you're training with sensitive data that you shouldn't be using in the first place. Or you are just giving people, random text from the internet as a source of advice, which is also not good, right? Or you are training with data that you shouldn't be using in that, we have a social expectation that you're not going to use in these situations in a way that is going to potentially harm the people whose data you are using. And they may not know that you are using their data in that way. And of course, we talked about adversarial attacks, right? So in addition to PII extraction, universal triggers just seem to be a quality of language models. It just seems to be a thing that they are sensitive to, and you cannot a priori know what all the universal triggers are. If someone has sufficient time with the model, right, if they do model duplication, they can figure out what those triggers are, man-in-the-middle attack, insert them into the prompt that you're sending, or, rerun the prompt or something, and serve, uniquely generated, difficult to detect hate speech or, encouragement of self-harm to users in therapy. And you don't even necessarily need an adversarial attacker to do that, right? You can't predict the output of a large language model, and the possibility that it's going to serve text that is harmful is high. And it's particularly high because that text doesn't need to be harmful on its own, right? Mental health support is not generic. It's specific to the person and their situation, right? And the exact same advice to 2 people in 2 different situations can be beneficial or neutral to one and very harmful to the other, right? So a great example here, if someone's having intrusive thoughts, maybe learning, you're not alone in your experience, could be very helpful to them. If someone's experiencing paranoia and they're like, I'm being followed by a man wearing a yellow hat, and the system is like, you're not alone in your experience, that's going to make it worse, right? That's going to reinforce that paranoid thought. Adding moderate exercise, great, potentially very helpful to somebody who's suffering from depression. There's lots of evidence that some moderate exercise can help with depression. If someone is suffering from OCD or compulsive exercising, that could, cause them to spiral. That could cause direct harm to them, right? Even just like general positive advice, right? If someone, open question how much that actually helps anybody, but if someone, say, is suffering from mania and you're like, go for it, you've got it, and you encourage their manic behavior, and whatever they're doing that may end up being really detrimental to their well-being, that's going to hurt them, right? And you can't know that you're not going to do this because of the nature of language models. And you might be like, okay, well, I'm going to get around that by doing some diagnosing, right? So I'm going to figure out what's wrong with somebody and then serve them appropriate advice. Nothing wrong with that. So first of all, misdiagnosis is very harmful. Even when it happens, I clicked on one of my citations, sorry. Even when it happens in a clinical setting, and in a clinical setting, you're like, well, that's one opinion, I can get a second opinion, right? There's sort of it's not always super accessible to everybody, but there is a way to address potential misdiagnosis. If the machine is doing it, right, you get that sort of idea of automation bias where like, well, the machine said, I'm schizophrenic, I must be schizophrenic, who knew? And of course, there's the additional problem here of a lot of the diagnosing that happens, particularly in the United States, has, racial components to it, right? So African Americans in the United States are far more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia than white patients, which is a very stigmatized mental illness in the United States, and are far less likely to be diagnosed with depression, a much less stigmatized mental illness in the United States, even though I think there's no strong evidence that there is a population level difference in rates between those two groups. So, there's the problem of misdiagnosis, right? If you're basing on historical data, you're probably going to recreate those historical patterns of harm. And then you are not a clinician, right? Your chatbot is not a clinician. That information is now linked with the patient. They may even not know that it is linked. And because you are not a clinician, HIPAA doesn't apply. And this has been a big issue in the mental health space. So BetterHelp, which you may be familiar with, they advertise a lot, provides online counseling. It is not therapy. You do not have a clinical relationship with your counselors. And they just straight up sell information to Facebook, right? Like, how often are you logging in? Metadata from every single one of the chat messages you spend to your therapist. It's in the terms of service, but is someone in acute mental distress going to carefully read the terms of service? No, this is a special population. They require additional care on our behalf, from us, right? They require like way more additional protections. And you're like, well, I'm never going to sell this data to data brokers. Great, you die. It's part of your estate. The executor sells it off so that they can evenly divide your assets. They sell it to a data broker. That is outside of your control, right? You created some sort of corporation to do this project under. It goes into bankruptcy. Its assets are auctioned off. Someone else buys that data, right? You cannot guarantee that that data is never going to be sold. And the reason why selling that data is so harmful is because, again, mental health issues and mental, illness is extremely stigmatized in the United States. And I'm talking more about the US here because that's where I'm from. But, these issues are going to apply around the world. In the US, they can just buy that information and raise your health insurance rates, right? Oh, you've been diagnosed with depression. That'll be an extra $40,000 a year. They can do it, right? There's nothing that users can do to prevent it. And even if the diagnosis is incorrect, having that information available potentially potentially for sale has a strong likelihood of harming people down the line, right? And, you know, that's setting aside other more direct issues like involuntary commitment or being placed under conservatorship. These are both things that happen to people who, you know, have mental illness or have been diagnosed with mental illness, even if it's, you know, not correct, right? So if you're familiar with sort of the news stories that were happening around Britney Spears and her conservatorship, which was extremely limiting in what she could do, right? Like, she was not allowed to have a child that she wanted to have. She didn't have control over her own reproductive choices because of this conservatorship, right? She was forced to, she was basically an indentured servant, right? She was forced to work, even though she didn't want to, for the profit of her conservator, who in this case was her father. And, you know, if you're under conservatorship, your right to vote can be removed. You could even be forcibly sterilized, right? I mean, it's been a while since someone was forcibly sterilized that we know about, who had mental illness or mental health issues and was under a conservatorship. But last year in the US, there were forcible sterilizations of women in ICE custody, right? Like, ICE is doing human rights abuses, but, you know, it is legal in 31 states, and it's legal because of a Supreme Court case in, I think, the 30s that specifically was talking about people with mental illnesses, right? This is extremely sensitive data. And just like, I understand the desire to help. The potential for harm is so high, right? When you're in a clinical setting, you can't just say, well, it might be better than nothing for some people. You have to say, this is not going to hurt this person, right? And we can't guarantee that. We're not clinicians. This is not a machine learning engineering problem, and we shouldn't treat it as such. That's not to say that we can't use any machine learning at all in the realm of mental health. It can definitely, you know, we can use it to create tools to support clinicians, things like, you know, helping to organize or do data mining, especially on device for clinician notes, or for helping people with journaling and self-reflection, right? ELIZA was very popular because it gave people a way to do structured self-reflection in a conversational setting. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but replacing a therapist, replacing a clinician is absolutely a horrible idea, top to bottom, soup to nuts. Do not do it. And I'm telling you this as a friend. I'm telling you this as a person who wants the best for you, who doesn't want you to be sued, and who doesn't want you to do things that you end up regretting. Because if you want to help, I'm going to assume that you don't want to hurt people, right? I'm not angry, right? I'm trying to express how serious this is. I'm not trying to make you feel like a bad person. I think if you have the impulse to help, that is good. But really make sure that what you're doing is helping. And I think that this is an application where automation won't help ever, and we should not do it. And I'm gonna put my glasses back on and read these comments. And this is what I spent yesterday doing, in addition to the other stuff that I was doing, and it's why I'm tired, but I feel extremely strongly about this. And I think it would be very easy for us as machine learning engineers, as language technologists, to mislead people about a system like this, maybe even unintentionally, in a way that ended up harming people, deeply, irrevocably harming people. Sip of tea. Hooey. All right. Old player. It's been a while. Hello. Cognition said, good rant. Thank you. Yes. And again, like, if you've thought about doing this, I'm not angry at you. I just don't do it. Yeah. Cognition says also highly idiosyncratic. Yes, absolutely. Vbolt says, I'm happy to live in the EU, where I'm probably naive to the things that can't happen here. I mean, I hope so. I would love for everyone to have very strong individual protections, legally and societally, to help them make their own decisions and live their own lives. Oh, all right. Yes. Big rant. Biss, hello, welcome. Sorry, you came in mid steamroll. Brett says, I should have said, oh no. Yes, I think that is a good response to this if it's, you know, an area that maybe you've worked in or learned a lot about. Yes. Yeah. Luke has a great point. I think we need to improve our compassion and relationship with humanity instead of deferring that fundamental work to machines. Yes, absolutely. If you want to help, so I have some suggestions here. You know, if you want to build something to support someone you love, build a relationship. That was very cheesy, but right. If people in your life are struggling with mental health, like, the most impactful thing that you can do is to be there for them, right? Like, be accessible, give them, you know, the gift of your time and energy and attention directly to help them address, you know, what they're struggling with, to help them out. Maybe they do need therapy. Maybe that's how you help them out, is to help them, you know, get into a therapeutic relationship that they need. Maybe they need, you know, connection to crisis resources. Maybe they just need a friend, and you can be that for them. Yeah. Brett says, my brain language model has issues sometimes. Hell yeah. Language disorders. I've mentioned this a couple times on the channel. I'm dyslexic, so I understand how that goes. Yeah. Oh no. John Oliver has an example of machine learning therapy where the bot blew off the person by connecting to the wrong subject matter of the chat. Yeah, like, it's not automatable, basically. No. Brett says, free healthcare would take the money out of insurance and the mining of that data. Yeah, that's a good point. Free healthcare would be great. It's not something we have in the US. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I have a lot of people who I consider enemies, Alexi, and thank you for listening. I hope this, you know, gave you a lot to think about. And yeah, like I said, I think like journaling prompts, custom journaling prompts could be a great use, right? Like, particularly if it was served on device. I think, you know, honestly, just a re-implementation of Eliza, right? Like, you chat, it parses, it rephrases the question and asks it back. I think that could be really helpful for some people. But yeah, I think we have to be very careful, and we have a lot of responsibility as engineers, and yeah, we need to be mindful of it. Anyway. Robbie says, I was bad at language subjects like Hindi, English, and Sanskrit. Yeah, I tried to learn Hindi a while back, and as often happens with me, learning the writing system was very difficult, and I kind of stopped. It is a cool language, though. All right. So this is a really interesting piece from Algorithm Watch, and I will... Boop. Robbie says, is it a sign of language disorders? I mean, I think we also have a little bit of a pathologizing view of, you know, intellectual differences, right? Neurodivergence is a term you'll hear quite a bit. That's a neurodivergence in the US. And I think more generally, right? I kind of think it's like a European thing, perhaps. Like, finding something more difficult than another thing doesn't mean that you have like a disorder with the thing. For me, one of the biggest problems day to day is that I am not a child anymore. Let me put it that way. And I do not reliably know the difference between right and left. And you're like, oh, do the thing with the L's. And as it turns out, I write my L's backwards sometimes. So yes, that's a pretty big different problem for me. But I do really well with cardinal directions, right? So relative direction, where I'm talking about, you know, what the sides of you are, tends to be a little bit more difficult for me. Absolute direction, where I'm like, turn north onto this road, is significantly easier for me. So, you know, brains are different. Not everybody's brain is the same. There's no like normal human. But yeah, sometimes language stuff is hard, especially when I'm tired. Anyway, this piece is a huge bummer. I promise it's not all going to be bummers. On, the use of the use of facial recognition. So I've talked about this quite a bit. Facial recognition is something I don't do, I don't support, I recommend that nobody do it. And this is sort of talking about a lot of the uses of facial recognition by citizens, like individual people, and what that means for them. So, yeah, I'm not going to go through it because I find it kind of upsetting, and I read it once, and we have another upsetting thing to read. Somewhere in here. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Sorry, it's this one. This one's the upsetting one. This one. All right, I'm going to pop the link to this in chat. But we've talked about, privacy and harms, etc. So there is, in the US, in the last couple of years, a enormous increase in the amount of surveillance that children face at school. I think sort of a common talking point is that it is to increase safety. There is no experimental evidence or causal evidence at all that increased surveillance reduces things like school shootings, for example. So that sort of talking point has no data at all to back it up, but the amount of surveillance is definitely increasing. Well, I'm glad I made you think, Alexi. And this is a very upsetting piece, but I'm just gonna pick up a couple things. So a big thing that has happened is that, particularly with COVID, a lot of school systems, particularly school systems that served poorer areas, provided devices to students, and those devices had a lot of surveillance technology on them, which was all for profit, built by companies that would love your money, please. And as taxpayers, we sure gave it to them. And the, the issues here are that, not only are students being surveilled when they're doing schoolwork on school devices, which I'm also not a fan of, but they definitely are doing it. It's that it is also surveilling students in their life as a whole, right? Including, scanning texts from student emails, scanning their cloud-based documents. And in particular, some of these services will also work on students' personal devices, right? So if a kid has a phone and they're texting their friends, if they've used that phone with the school computer, maybe to play, I don't know, what's that, the quiz game that you do on your phone? Anyway, for something like that, these services also have access to all of these children's personal information on their personal devices. And that is a awful thing. And one of the things that really stuck out at me, it's in here, is these devices are outing students. So outing is if you are, LGBT, maybe you are, you're still figuring out your sexuality, maybe you are trans, that's information that's very sensitive. It can, I've been thinking a lot recently about Matthew Shepard. Matthew Shepard was a young man who was killed in Wyoming as a result of a hate crime. It is extremely upsetting. Don't look it up if you're in a fragile mental state. Anyway, so information that someone is part of these groups can be extremely dangerous to them. And these companies, these private for-profit surveillance companies, are outing students. And one Center for Democracy and Technology report revealed that 13% of students know someone who has been outed as a result of student monitoring software. And this has, I don't know how familiar you all are with sort of the American culture around abusing queer youth, basically. But there are things called like conversion camps that Ooh, okay, upsetting subject. Safe to say that if a student has not shared this information with their family, it is likely to protect their own safety. And in outing these students, they're likely to, at least some of them, face extreme harm as a result of it. Another extremely upsetting thing is that a lot of these systems will contact cops directly if they think that, something's up. There is the idea in the US of the school to prison pipeline, which is basically where children in school are basically through a series of institutional harms sent directly to prison, and stay there. It's much more complex than that, but basically this is an enormous leap in authoritarianism that is really affecting these students, and is really awful. And anyway, bad time all around. Hate it so much. Again, surveilling children is not a fundamental human need. We don't need this. We're paying for this if you pay taxes in the US, and it is giving me hives, and I'm just gonna move on. Gay conversion therapy is again very upsetting subject. Basically, it's the idea that is supported by a lot of particularly Christian fundamentalists that being gay, being trans is a choice. And if you just, you can convince children that they are not by doing things that will psychologically harm them. It's... again, extremely upsetting. And I'm just gonna, this section today is getting to me. I figured that was sarcastic cognition. So this is, very worrying. A lot of people were like, oh, it's just during, COVID while students are home. It is not. Students are returning to the classroom. Whether or not that's a good idea is a separate discussion. And this surveillance is continuing to strip these extremely, children are another, vulnerable population would be the research ethics term, right? They don't have a lot of control over their lives. So you need to take extra care when you are working with the data of children to protect them, basically. And I think that's not happening here. Old Player says, Instagram is spying on me. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I do not trust Instagram or Facebook or Meta. Oh, that's really good to hear. Brett says, New Zealand government recently banned conversion therapy. Hell yeah. Great to hear. What about the Algorithm Watch article? We talk about facial recognition, but it's not language technology, so we're not going to go into deep depth, but definitely check it out. Oh, yeah. This says, I grew up with someone who got trashed by the school to prison pipeline. It's really sad. It really is. And it's, for those of you who are not familiar, the United States has, I think by capita, the largest percentage of its population in prison of any place in the world. And it is a direct legacy of chattel slavery. So if you're not familiar, the 13th Amendment bans unpaid labor and slavery, except in prison populations. And a lot of prisons are for-profit companies. The history of justice in the United States is, again, it's upsetting. It's really upsetting. It's important that we know about it and talk about it, particularly if we're in the US, because it informs, our day-to-day life, and it's something that we can, hassle our elected representatives about and choose our elected representatives based on. But Ugh. says, imagining legions of hackers being born because of overzealous student monitoring software currently being deployed on school technology. I mean, honestly, being able to safeguard your personal privacy on devices from a young age, I think is going to be an important digital skill that everyone's going to need to develop, unfortunately. So, yeah. Cognition says it's never temporary about the increase in surveillance. Yep. Anyway, more upsetting stuff. I promise it's not all upsetting. But if you are interested in learning more about surveillance and the police and how this affects people's day-to-day lives, this podcast is just wrapped up, so all the episodes are available. It's about basically what this is like in Detroit. If you're not familiar with Detroit, it's a city in the US in Michigan, which is a northern state that is very, very heavily Black, demographically wise. And basically it was... there used to be a lot more automotive manufacturing in the United States. Detroit was a city where a lot of automotive manufacturing happened. And a lot of people, Black folks who were leaving the South during the Great Migration, moved to Detroit. And then when those industries collapsed, the white people took the money and left, leaving this sort of crumbling city with a lot of poverty and a lot of issues. And a lot of the problems were sort of the carceral state and the prison system are particularly heightened in Detroit because, again, the US prison system is a direct legacy of slavery. Anyway, so if you're interested in learning more or sort of want to learn about the situation, I think this is a really good resource. Also, if you just like podcasts. All right, and now, I promise, I'm always trying to leave you with a sense of empowerment. So this is going to be today, this evening, and I'll pop the link. Oop, no, I missed it. This evening. So we talked about ShotSpotter, which is this software that claims to be able to detect gunshots and doesn't seem to work, but sure is convincing people to give them money. And another one of my companies on my enemy list, as y'all are referring to it. And if you're interested in learning more, so I think this is going to be more US focused, but if you're interested in learning more about how to, prevent the use of this technology and basically work against them, this will be today in like 6 hours, 7 hours? 7 hours. So sign up if you're interested. Detroit, aka Motor City. Yep. Old Player says, I do not know English. I understand, but some words. I do. I'm going to give you the link to the YouTube video, Old Player, because I have captions turned on there, and it was a bit of a struggle. But there are always going to be captions on YouTube. I can't figure out how to get them on Twitch without doing a third-party service. I'm working on it. But yeah, that might be if you can access YouTube. Please elaborate more on the algorithm watch article. I guess we can. But basically, they are talking about the effects of basically anyone being able to use facial recognition technology. So OSINT is open source intelligence, which is a thing that's happening. I don't really know how I feel about it. I'm not really involved in that community, but I guess a good example in a US context would be sort of identifying people from photos of, the January 6th attempted coup. Yeah. And then so this article basically goes through a lot of the potential misuses and harms that you can do with access to this technology. Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but definitely good to check out if you're interested in it. Robbie says, I don't get English very well. Yeah, English is hard. Unfortunately, it's sort of like the lingua franca. I say unfortunately, it is my first language, but I guess if there were another language that a lot of technical work was done in, I probably would have learned that at some point in my education, so, but I feel you. That's why I tried to get the captions on the live stream. And this is actually happening today. It's also happening tomorrow. And this is a send you that, is a conference on the civics of technology. So civic, sort of like involved in the civic life, government, etc. And there's going to be a talk by Ruha Benjamin, who is fabulous, great researcher, really, really love her work. And then there'll be one tomorrow by Dr. Safir Vakli, who I'm less familiar with, but this should be a really good conference. It's free, it's online, and check it out if you're interested. And it'll be, it's actually going on right now, but it'll be an hour after the time my stream usually starts in your time. So a good place to meet like-minded people, learn more, and sort of continue to think about civics and technology. All right, finally, we've got just some fun stuff, some lighthearted stuff. I know we talk about some heavy stuff in the stream, and I think this is a nice little palate cleanser, right? You can't. There's sort of a discussion in a lot of activist spaces or caring profession spaces like nursing about like emotional burnout, and it's important not to just only learn about upsetting things constantly. So first off, we've got somebody trolling me. So let me adjust this slightly. I'm just realizing it's a little bit low. Well, never mind. So I will explain the joke, which will make it more funny. An AeroPress is a way of making coffee where you basically have like a funnel and then another funnel that creates like a seal, and you put the coffee in the bottom funnel and then you put a little coffee filter under it and then you press it down. And it's very much a coffee snob way of making coffee. Because if you like really like the taste of coffee, it's like, oh, it's a good way to do it. And you have a lot of control over how the coffee is made. And then K-cups are horrible. They're an enormous source of plastic solution, and the guy who invented them regrets doing it because of that. But they're little single serving pods of coffee that you put in a machine and you like press a button and it makes coffee. And they generally make horrible coffee if you enjoy the flavor of coffee on its own merits, in addition to being a huge source of plastic waste. So this combines a very like fancy niche way of making coffee with a horrible polluting way of making coffee, and nobody wants this. So the joke is that this is going to really upset anyone who enjoys coffee. Yep. Hello, Space Fairy. Welcome. Yep. I'm just checking the chat. Robbie says 90% of the topics were data privacy in the ethics section. Yeah, they really were today. They aren't always, but I don't know. I think it's relevant, right? It's what's happening right now. And hopefully, I mean, the ADPPA, which is the data privacy protection legislation that the US is maybe going to pass, is out of committee now, so we'll see. Brett says, and the proprietary pods are connected to the branded machine. Lol, the coffee hack. Yep. Yeah. Hi, old player. Space Ferrari says, I love coffee. I think it's the best thing in life. Heck yeah. Cognition says it's hilarious. Yeah. Did I purchase it already? I did not. I will not be purchasing this. No. I do have some other ML stuff, but it's called Coffee Chat, and we've never actually talked about coffee, so I figured it. Yeah. Alexi said, we'd be interested to hear about other truck-related technology and leisure from your state, anything related to machine learning. Or like, is there a lot of machine learning work in Virginia? A fair amount. We have a lot of banking. We have a lot of insurance. Like Geico, I think there's a lot of banking and insurance. Historically, there was a lot of tobacco done in, like, grown and shipped, and a lot of tobacco companies were based in Virginia. Not as much anymore, since tobacco is just sort of like less of a thing in the US, tobacco use. And then, so directly north of my state is the national capital. So there's also a lot of defense work. And then also people who just work for the federal government, right? Like the Park Service or the post office. So there's a lot of government work in the state as well. And then I'm not from Richmond. I went to high school in a place called Fluvanna County, which is a very small rural county. And their main industry was tree farms. So like quick growing trees you cut down and then make paper out of, basically. And also like hay, cow calf, very agricultural. So there's a lot of agriculture here as well. And this is, so I know I rag on computer vision a lot. So when I come across something that I'm like, this is okay, I'm okay with this, I like to share it. And this one is interpolating frames in stop motion footage, which I think is just really cool, right? Like you already have the footage, you're not generating new stuff, you're just improving the speed of being able to do this particular type of animation. And also it looks cool, right? It doesn't exactly look like stop motion. It has sort of like a different visual look to it. So I think this is pretty cool and appealing, and looks like it works pretty well. So Rachel approved. Brett says, love my stovetop espresso. Oh, do you have like a maca pot? Yeah. Oh, you're thinking about trucks and machine learning? Oh, so right at the beginning of the stream, I talked about how sometimes people will crack specifically English walnuts by putting them between like the treads of a truck and then driving a truck over them a couple times. I mean, if you're looking for, you know, good old country ingenuity, we got a lot of that. Definitely. Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And this is by Karen X Chang on Twitter, and I'll pop that in the chat as well. Boop, boop. And Lexi says Eulerian video magnification is also cool. Not familiar with that, but yeah. Aw. Bis says, thanks for hosting and being down to earth. I constantly feel like I don't belong in this space, and you deliver hope and peace. Aw, thank you. I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, it can sometimes feel a little homogenous in the field, I'm not gonna lie. But there's lots of types of people doing lots of great work. All right. And then this isn't machine learning related, but it is really cool. So the US just certified the first small nuclear reactor. So here it is. And this is particularly cool because they can assemble it at a factory and like ship it, right? So it's like a prefab home basically, but for nuclear reactors. Yeah, I think it's just really cool. I'm a big supporter of nuclear power as a way to address the climate crisis. We actually, in Virginia, we have a big nuclear power station that makes Virginia one of the cleanest energy states in the South. Thank you. Because we have, you know, nuclear power and not just coal plants. Yeah, so I think this is cool. It's called NuScale. So maybe we'll see more localized nuclear power in the future. Yeah. Computer vision isn't too bad. Some applications of computer vision are okay. Some of them are deeply bad. Speaking of computer vision, I can't give y'all a whole pass. So this is from a friend of mine on Twitter. And Joe does... if any of you are big readers and like reading fantasy novels, he does book reviews of fantasy novels. So a good person to follow if you are a fantasy novel enjoyer. Lesser Joe. And he has some examples of his smart fridge photos and just how badly it's doing, right? So looking at these examples, I don't think a single one of them is correct. Maybe this one down here that says meat is correct. But right, so there's like a thing of Parmesan here that has a lime in front of it, and the Parmesan is labeled lemonade and the lime is labeled lemon. In English, limes are the green ones and lemons are the yellow ones. I realize that is very confusing false cognate for a lot of languages. This pizza box is labeled turkey breast. So just like extremely wrong. Yeah. So good example of a bad user experience of computer vision that I think is pretty funny. Robbie says, does Virginia do uranium mining? I believe we have uranium veins, but it is not legal for us to mine them. Let me double check. pretty sure. Yeah. So uranium has never been mined in Virginia. However, uranium-rich bedrock exists across the Commonwealth. So it could be, but it's not, basically. And the source for that is energy.virginia.gov. If you're wondering why they said Commonwealth, Virginia is not a state, it's a Commonwealth. We just lump it in with the rest of the states and the rest of the Commonwealths. Cognition says, meat, yeah. And then this I thought was just funny. Dilip is using Copilot here to do code completion. And here in the line, return accuracy score, Y value predicted, which I'm sure we've all written something very similar if you've been working in machine learning. It auto-completed this inline comment about accuracy, which again, I'm sure we've all done, but I think that it is very funny that Copilot does that, and also pretty funny that it got included. Alexi says there's a Twitter account posting object recognition results on weird images. Quite funny. Yeah, I think it's helpful to, I think there's a trend on machine learning Twitter to post cool and interesting results that look really good and are cherry picked, and that it's not a great representation of where the field actually is for the public as a whole. And unfortunately, or fortunately, right, we're in a very highly publicized field, and it's important for us to help shape people's expectations about what we can and can't do. And then finally, a little language joke to round it off. So this is from Lingua Celta. So is a dishcloth the negation of cloth or a double cloth? So the joke here is that dishcloth has two morphemes, dish and cloth. How do you know that? Through historical data and looking it up. But the joke is that Dr. Toby Walsh is parsing it as dish, dis, cloth, or die, cloth, both of which are wrong. And in the stream we did a while ago about tokenizing using syllables and why you wouldn't do that, part of the thing that we talked about is the difficulty of tokenizing with morphemes is you have to know where the morpheme boundaries are, and it's not really learnable. You basically have to look it up. And this is a great example of why, because both of those are valid morphemes to begin a word, but they are both wrong. No. Lexi said, did I already ask you about the weirdest thing I found in my data? Yes, I talked about the chatbot data I was working with that someone had just said a bunch of slurs. I guess that's not that weird. It's internet language data, but yeah. And I can't come up with another example right now because I'm tired. But that is what I had for you all. And before we wrap up, I just want to say a big thank you to my monthly supporters. So right now I'm doing this as my full-time job, and I'm slowly not making negative money, which is great. And it's thanks to these fine folks. So thank you so much, all of you, for your support. And if you're interested in supporting me, my coffee is there. Nope, there. Up in the top, it's coffee.com/RCTEATMAN, like I am everywhere. So thank you, Docking AI. You're the best. Also, if you are one of my monthly supporters, the links for the stream are already on the coffee. I did it ahead of the stream for the third time in a row. I'm very proud of myself. We'll see if the streak continues. We'll find out. But yeah, thank you so much for joining today, everybody. I hope this was informative, helped nurture some hope in you, and yeah, was useful, I will say. I don't want to say necessarily enjoyable, because again, we talked about some heavy stuff today, and spoiler alert, we'll probably continue to, unless the world gets magically better the next week. Oh, speaking of next week, I will not be doing the stream next week. I'm going to be out of town, but we will be back the week after next, so it'll be a double edition. So also no links if you are in the links please tier of my monthly support. And I'll post about that on Coffee and YouTube and Twitter as well, just to remind y'all. All right. Thank you, Luke. thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend. You get a chance to do something you love with people you love. And I will see you on Tuesday for the next stream, which will be on something. You'll find out. I'll find out when I figure it out. And I will talk to you then. So have a good time, stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you later. Bye.